right, so we've got your Pikes Peak Library District, some of your Pikes Peak Library District young adult staff here to talk about books. So my name is Britt.
I'm Lauren.
Well, let's talk about some of our favorite books that we read in 2020. Who wants to kick it off?
You recommended this, and it was incredible. Probably my first book in verse I've ever done, and I love that so much. It went like so fast. I read it in a break, just sitting here at my table. I loved it.
It's so good. Has anyone else read that one?
Yeah, Punching the Air. I loved it.
Yeah. So it's Punching the Air by E.B. Zaboy and
So long.
Thank you. And he's one of the exonerated 5.
Yeah.
So
I also really liked that they included like the art in there, so you would see kind of the pictures as you were going through as his state of mind changed. I just thought it was really cool.
Yeah. Ooh, I don't think I read an advanced copy, I think, so I didn't have that. So now I'm gonna maybe go pick up the real copy.
Do it. Well, I'll put another novel in verse out there, because I read Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo, and it was amazing. All of her books are amazing. Okay, so what I liked about it is, so it has these 2 girls, and one's from the Dominican Republic and one's from the US. And there's a plane crash and their dad dies, and they find out all these crazy family secrets, including that they're sisters, and he had 2 secret families, one in each country. So it's kind of this crazy twist right at the beginning, and then it's all told in poetry, so you're kind of getting Yahaira, who's the girl in New York City, her story in verse, and then her sister Camino, her story in verse, and she really kind of mixes up. I just feel like she does a good job, even though it's both in poetry capturing their voices there. So yeah, it's just really beautiful. And it's another one, like Larissa said, you could like read it on a lunch break because it's such a short book. But definitely recommend it if you didn't read it yet.
Yeah, I haven't read that one yet. I've read her other 2 and I loved them. I've been like, ooh, plane crash. I don't know if I'm mentally prepared for that right now.
Yeah, it is heavy. No denying it. It's a lot of them dealing with grief. And then just insane twist about their family at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I do like the idea. I mean, I don't like the idea of a secret family, but I like the idea of reading about one.
And it's based on a true story. So I was reading the end of it, and she explains that, so there really was this flight that crashed going from New York City to the Dominican Republic. And she said there actually were a couple of cases where they found out these crazy secrets, including one of these hidden families. And that was kind of what inspired her to write this book. So I thought it was interesting that there's a real life case of it that kind of led to that.
Yeah, she gets the PPLD favorite star. So speaking of that, I'll talk about one of my books, Stamped. Have you all read it yet? I know I've talked about that one a lot too.
No, I just came in on Overdrive from each day though, so.
Oh, well, perfect timing. I listened to it because it's the YA version of Ibram X. Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning, and it's written by staff favorite Jason Reynolds. That's why I was like, we're gonna read everything he writes. So it's just amazing. It's a version essentially of Black history globally, of racism essentially globally, and then it focuses more on the end at the US, and it was fascinating. So much stuff. I learned so much stuff that I never learned in history class, and he kind of starts it off by being this is a history book that's not a history book. For example, when he's talking about Thomas Jefferson, I lost my mind when he said this. But he was I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure that Thomas Jefferson was the first person to ever say that he had Black friends. And I was like, right? So that's the tone of the book. So it's not preachy or anything, but it is super important. And if you're looking to read some anti-racist stuff, I can't recommend anything more strongly. So Stamped by Jason Reynolds.
Awesome. Love it.
Nice.
I read 3 YA books this year because of the pandemic and a baby. So, but yeah, one of them was this really weird book called Half Witch. And when I read it, I was like, it's by John Schaffstall. And it was this very bizarre fantasy that almost felt like it could have been an adult book, but because the main character was there they go. Because the main character was a teenager, like a younger teen, they like made it a YA book. But it was just such like an off-the-wall weird fantasy, where like basically witches can make people out of like different objects, and so this girl is like trying to find this book in the fairy world. It was a long time since I read it. This is a terrible description. It was just so bizarre, and like, but the description of how the witches like can make things is so cool, because it's like they like use all these things around them, and they like basically build you out of different household objects, and they go on this adventure. And it was so weird and like just very different. And I'm in this weird fantasy rut where like anytime I read about so and so is different from the other girls in her kingdom of blah de blah, and she finds out she has the magic, like I can't do it. I just can't, because they all just like are the same. Like I swear, every time I read a fantasy book description, I'm like, oh, that's literally the same description as 5,000 other books. Sorry, fantasy authors, but get different descriptions. Write some weirder stuff. So it's just weird and different, and I was like, I don't even know if I like this, but it's just different. So Half Witch, it was cool.
I read one that was very much like that, where it was like super weird, and I wasn't sure if I liked it, but I loved how out there the premise was. Has anyone read this? It was Alatsoe by Darcy Little Badger. Okay, it just came out, and the premise is it's set in this like near future America, but it's a much weirder America. Magic has come back. Like, you can teleport places by stepping through fairy rings, and there's vampires around for no reason, and just a bunch of weird stuff happening everywhere. And our main character, Ellie, or Alatsoe, has this ability that's been passed down in her family to, like, summon the spirits of the dead, but specifically they only do animals. So she has, like, a pet ghost dog, and her grandmother had a pet woolly mammoth that she rode to the grocery store every day. So it's like this super out there premise, and then it ends up with her like investigating her uncle's murder. So she goes out to this small town with her best friend to try and figure out what happened to him. So it's all this like, she basically wants to grow up to become a paranormal investigator in this new world. So it's just a super weird setting, and it's not a perfect book. It's like the first book the author. But if you want something that's like super weird fantasy, that's like not special girl finds out she's the specialist person ever, I would recommend that one.
I have another also kind of cool fantasy on my list, but it's more new adult. It's definitely not like YA, or it's not being sold as YA, but all the main characters are in their like late teens, early 20s, so you know. And you all have probably heard me talk about it before because I really liked it, but it's called Black Sun, and it's by Rebecca Rowanhorse, and it's a fantasy set in pre-Columbian Americas, but it's like an epic fantasy, so it's more along the lines of like, it's not as elaborate of Game of Thrones, but it does have like those switching perspectives kind of, and it starts, oh my god, has like probably one of the best first chapters I've read in a really long time, and like basically it starts off with this character ritually mutilating her son and then jumping into the river, and that's how the book starts, and then we go from there. But like her son, essentially, he is kind of a little bit of a chosen one. It's like able to commune with the crow god, so he's like the Daenerys of this piece, but instead of dragons you've got crows, and I really enjoyed it. I liked it a lot, and there's she's where it was left, there's clearly going to be a sequel, so I'm excited to check that out whenever it comes out. So good stuff. Any other books anyone wanted to talk about? Anyone read any good middle grade?
Yeah. I'm on the last chapter, so I think I can say I've read it. But I'm basically read HoloPox by Jessica Townsend. It's the third book in the Morrigan Crow series. Britt, I know you read the other two. And I put this on hold, like, yay, escapist fantasy. It's one of my favorite, like, middle grade fantasy series. And then it ended up being about a pandemic that's hit their city. So it's like the worst year for her to release it. She actually pushed it back. It was supposed to come out in March, and then for obvious reasons they delayed it until now. But it's really good. And the whole series is about this girl named Morgan who's born, and she's like a cursed child, and the prediction is that they're all going to die on their 12th birthday if you're born as a cursed child. But instead, the night she's supposed to die, this guy named Jupiter shows up randomly and spirits her away to this hidden country she wasn't aware of, and she lives there as an undocumented immigrant with him. Her travels trying to fit in when she's like not wanted in either world. So it's a really cool fantasy series, but then it was not escapist at all reading it this year because it was like pandemic, lockdown, deniers, like all that stuff that we're actually dealing with. But
it's got some of that, like, one of the things I loved about that series is that it's got some of that like quirky and dark, like, I'm going to use Harry Potter because that's the easiest way to do, you know what I mean? Like some of the quirky, dark. Yeah, exactly. Old school Harry Potter with like, like with characters almost like the classes and stuff like that, so it's not like a wizard school per se, but it's also like not that, at least, as you go through.
Gigantic talking cats, so that for me I was instantly sold. And it has a lot of, this whole book kind of centers, the pandemic centers on the Wunimals, which are the like human animal hybrids that exist in their society. So
I didn't read it yet, but the last book of the Adventurers Guild came out this year. Have any of you read the first two or any of those? Oh my god, they're so good. You really have to. It's a fantasy written by two guys who play D&D together, and it reads, I don't know if this is going to be a positive thing or a negative thing for you guys, but it reads like D&D in a really good way.
Is that a graphic novel?
No, they're like kind of chunky. They're chunky little books. But the second one ended with like a character. A, it ended on a massive cliffhanger, and B, one of the characters is like wicked possessed and no one realizes it. And so I really need to dive into the third one because I gotta find out what goes on there. But it comes out like October, I think. It's just a horrible time to try and drop a new book.
You just reminded me, like the first book I read this year, Night of the Dragon by Julie Kagawa, it was the end of her Shadow of the Fox series, and that's another series where I'm like, it's definitely for sure reads like a D&D campaign where they're like picking up party members as they go along. So, in style D&D campaign, I would recommend that series too.
How was the third one? I read the first two and I like somehow missed that the third one was even out.
Okay, so it is good, but it does have a little bit of like a bury your gaze thing going on towards the end, so I was kind of like, but it kind of, it was as satisfying an ending to that arc as I thought I was going to get, and it had a little bit, enough of a twist at the end that I was fine with it.
Okay. Yeah, I liked the first two a lot.
Yeah.
On that, I read a novella this year, and like I don't read a ton of novellas, and like if you don't know, they're short books, they're on the shorter side, and I read one called The Pure Moon Reflected on Water, and it's about, it's basically like nun isn't a nun and instead goes and kicks a lot of butt, which is a trope that I really enjoy, so yeah, it's about this woman who like joins up with a group of bandits, and it's very, very bantery, and I love banter, and it's also got a lot of like, I learned about something called wuxia, which is like essentially like Chinese martial arts, so and so they've got a lot of that going on too, but it's really short. It does not have the bury your gaze problem. It has some really good trans representation, so that's also awesome, but it's by Zen Cho, so I would really highly recommend that novella if you're like, I only have brain space for something less than 200 pages. I got you.
You just reminded me actually that I also read a novella. I totally forgot about it until you said the word. But Gaiman, Sleeper and the Spindle, I think. I read it a few months ago, and it was really, really fun, quick, short little fairy tale retelling that's easy to consume in this time.
Isn't that illustrated too?
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Yeah, did anyone read any good graphic novels?
Not ones that were published this year. I read older ones.
I really like Maggie Stiefvater. Surprise. Maggie Stiefvater did Swamp Thing. I love that author. She did Swamp Thing, like an origin story for that, as part of like DC is doing, but they're doing like little teenage origin stories for a lot of their DC characters, and so they had Maggie Stiefvater write Swamp Thing, which I think whoever made that decision was. So I really enjoyed that. So yeah, it's good. If you like comics or if you like any of the other DC ones, it's definitely one of the better ones, I would say.
I was gonna say, if you're not sick of living in a dystopia, I read A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. which was the prequel to the Hunger Games that came out this year. And it was like, I'd recommend it if you're a fan of the series, because it's about the dictator, Snow, and it's telling kind of the story of his childhood and growing up in the capital and how he becomes the person that he is. And it for sure was not what I was expecting, so it's really interesting, like, deep dive into the mind of a sociopath as he's growing up in this war-torn country. But it's, like, crazy dark as it sounds, and it's, like, the story of, like, the very first modern-day Hunger Games and how they came to be. So I think fans of the series would really enjoy it. If you aren't a fan, I don't know, I think it would require maybe a little bit more background knowledge, because I feel like it goes into it with the assumption that you've read the originals. Or that was my feeling when I was reading it.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, we were going to listen to that on our way to Nebraska, and then we were like, oh, the audiobook is actually longer than our road trip. So
it's crazy long.
It's very long, yeah. So I haven't read it yet, but it's on my list.
No, low-key, I got to the midpoint and I was like, I feel like this could be done. Like, this feels like an epilogue, but then there was a whole other section. It's like these two periods of his life that you're being told about. But honestly, if she'd split it into two, it would have been less overwhelming of a book. So maybe she should have. Who knows?
Let's see. Oh, one other one I want to talk about, because it is weird that this is happening, but it's called Yes, No, Maybe So, and it's by Becky Albertalli and Aisha Saeed, and it's literally about teenagers campaigning for John Ossoff in Georgia. Which could be happening right now! So, like literally John Ossoff. They call him something different in the book, but it's clearly him, and then when you get to the end, they acknowledge that it was him. I don't know why more people aren't talking about that book right now, but they should be.
I don't know if this is going to be YA or not. I'm actually trying to find out right now, but I'm really excited about it because I love V.E. Schwab. She has a new book coming out in 2020, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, about a woman, I can't remember what time period she starts in, I think maybe the 17 or 1800s, basically who's like afraid of falling into a routine and then growing old and not leaving her mark on the world or anything mattering, and then makes a deal with the devil to live forever and then physically can't make her mark on the world. That's the trade-off that she's making, and I just think that sounds like such a fun concept, and I love V.E. Schwab anyway, everything she's ever written, so I'm excited.
Tell me, Britt, it's on my TBR. Is it worth reading?
You're gonna hate it. Sorry, Larissa.
Okay.